I was sent away to boarding school because my stepmom didn't like my energy, then found out my room had been converted into a nail salon for her side business. What I discovered when I walked into my childhood home after 16 years will leave you speechless. Before we start, please like this story, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Hi, I'm Sarah. I'm 31 years old, and this is the story that changed everything I thought I knew about family, betrayal, and finding your own strength. The story you're about to listen to involves secrets that were buried for over a decade, manipulation that runs deeper than you can imagine, and revenge that came in a way no one saw coming. I still remember the smell, that sharp, chemical tang of acetone mixed with something floral and fake. It hit me the moment I stepped through the front door of what used to be my childhood home. For a second, I thought maybe Dad had started dating someone new, someone who really loved her manicures. I was wrong, so completely, devastatingly wrong. "Dad?" I called out, my voice echoing in the hallway that looked exactly the same as it did 16 years ago. Same beige walls, same family photos lining the staircase, same creaky third step that always announced when someone was coming upstairs. Except now, there were new sounds coming from upstairs. Voices, laughter, the low hum of what sounded like a hairdryer. "Sarah?" Dad's voice came from the kitchen, surprised and a little shaky. "You're early." I wasn't early. I was exactly on time for our planned visit, the first one in 3 years. But Dad had been forgetting things lately. Small things, mostly. Names of neighbors, where he put his keys. Sometimes bigger things, like conversations we'd had just days before. I found him in the kitchen, stirring sugar into his coffee with the same chipped blue spoon he'd used for as long as I could remember. He looked older than his 68 years, smaller somehow, like he'd been folding in on himself. His hair had gone completely gray, and there were new lines around his eyes that spoke of worry I didn't understand. "There's my girl," he said, but his smile seemed forced. "How was the drive?" "Long," I said, accepting his hug. He smelled like Old Spice and something else I couldn't place. Something medicinal. "Dad? What's that noise upstairs?" His face went blank for just a moment, like someone had switched off a light behind his eyes. Then he shook his head, looking confused. "Noise?" "The voices. It sounds like people are up there." "Oh." He set down his coffee cup, and I noticed his hand was shaking slightly. "That's just... Kelly has some friends over." Kelly, my stepmother. The woman who'd entered our lives when I was 13 and systematically erased me from it by the time I was 15. I hadn't seen her in 16 years, and I'd been hoping to keep it that way. "She still lives here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Of course she lives here. This is her home." Her home, not our home. Not the home where I'd taken my first steps, lost my first tooth, where Mom had tucked me in every night until cancer took her when I was 12. Kelly's home. The voices upstairs got louder, and I heard what sounded like a cash register opening and closing. Dad's expression grew more confused, like he was trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. "I should probably go say hello," I said, though every fiber of my being was screaming at me to get back in my car and drive the 4 hours home to my apartment in Chicago. "Maybe later," Dad said quickly. "She's busy right now. Business stuff." Business stuff. In my childhood home. The curiosity was killing me, but something in Dad's tone made me hesitate. He looked nervous, almost scared, and that wasn't like him at all. The father I remembered had been confident, decisive, a little too willing to pick Kelly's side over mine, but never scared. We spent the afternoon catching up, or trying to. Dad kept losing track of conversations, starting stories he couldn't finish. He'd ask me the same question twice in 10 minutes, but every now and then, he'd remember something perfectly, like the time I'd hidden his reading glasses in the cookie jar when I was 7, or how Mom used to sing off-key in the shower every morning. The noises upstairs continued all afternoon. Footsteps, voices, running water, that cash register sound. At one point, I swear I heard someone say, "That'll be $45, and don't forget to book your next appointment." When evening rolled around, the house finally got quiet. Dad had dozed off in his recliner, and I found myself standing at the bottom of the staircase, staring up at the second floor like it might hold answers to questions I didn't even know I was asking. I could hear Kelly moving around up there, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor of what used to be the hallway, where I'd learned to rollerblade, where I'd sat cross-legged outside Mom's room during her worst days, just listening to her breathe. "Sarah." I turned around. Kelly stood in the kitchen doorway, and for a moment, I was 13 again, feeling small and unwelcome in my own home. She looked exactly the same. Same bottle blonde hair, same too bright lipstick, same way of looking at me like I was something unpleasant she'd found on the bottom of her shoe. "Kelly," I kept my voice steady, "it's been a while." "Yes, it has." She crossed her arms, and I noticed her nails were perfectly manicured, bright pink with little gems on the ring fingers. "Your father didn't mention you were coming. I called last week. We've been planning this visit for a month." Her expression shifted, just slightly, a flicker of something that might have been guilt or annoyance, or both. "He forgets things now. You know that, right?" I did know that. It was one of the reasons I'd finally swallowed my pride and agreed to visit. Dad's sister had called me 6 months ago, worried about changes she'd noticed during her visits. Memory lapses, confusion, bills piling up unpaid. "The house sounds busy today," I said, watching her face carefully. "I run a small business from home now. Nothing that would interest you. Nothing that would interest me. Just like when I was 15, and she'd decided that my interests, my opinions, my very presence were too much for her to handle. Just like when she'd convinced Dad that boarding school would be better for everyone." "What kind of business?" She waved a hand dismissively. "Beauty services, manicures, pedicures, that sort of thing. Very small scale." Something cold settled in my stomach. "From upstairs?" "I converted one of the spare rooms." Her tone was getting sharper, more defensive. "It works better than trying to rent commercial space." One of the spare rooms. We'd had 3 bedrooms upstairs. Mom and Dad's room, my room, and the guest room that had served as Dad's office. If she'd converted the guest room, why did I feel like something was terribly wrong? "I should let you get settled," Kelly said, already turning away. "I'm sure you're tired from the drive." She disappeared back into the kitchen, leaving me standing at the bottom of the stairs with a growing sense of dread I couldn't explain. Something was off. Something was very, very off. That night, I lay in the guest bed, listening to the house settle around me. Every creak and groan brought back memories I'd spent years trying to forget. The sound of Mom's cough echoing through the walls during her last months. The silence that had filled the house after she died. The way Kelly's voice had gradually replaced Mom's in the daily soundtrack of our lives. Around midnight, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Quiet, deliberate steps that stopped right outside my door. I held my breath, waiting, but after a moment, the footsteps moved on. Toward the stairs, down to the kitchen. The soft sound of the back door opening and closing. In the morning, I woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. Dad was in the kitchen, looking more alert than he had the day before, humming an old song Mom used to love. For a moment, it felt like the old days, before Kelly, before everything went wrong. "Morning, sweetheart," he said, flipping bacon in the cast iron skillet Mom had used for Sunday breakfasts. Sleep okay? Great, I lied. Dad, can I ask you something? Shoot. When Kelly said she converted a spare room for her business, which room did she mean? The bacon popped and sizzled. Dad didn't answer right away, and when he did turn around, that confused look was back on his face. I'm not sure I understand the question. Upstairs, the 3 bedrooms, Mom and Dad's room, my old room, and the guest room. Which one did she convert? Dad stared at me for a long moment, and I could almost see him trying to piece together something that didn't quite fit. Your old room is still your room, honey. We wouldn't touch that. But something in his voice wavered, like he wasn't quite sure if what he was saying was true. Can I see it? The question hung in the air between us. Dad turned back to the bacon, but his shoulders had gone tense. Why would you want to do that? Because it's my room. Because I want to see if any of my old things are still there. Of course they are. Where else would they be? But he still wouldn't look at me. After breakfast, Dad disappeared into the living room with his newspaper, and I found myself alone in the kitchen, staring up at the ceiling like I could see through it to the second floor. The house was quiet again, but I kept thinking about those voices yesterday, those footsteps last night. I climbed the stairs slowly, my hand trailing along the banister Mom had polished every Saturday morning. The hallway looked the same, but there was something different about the air up here. It smelled like those chemicals I'd noticed yesterday, but stronger, more permanent. Mom and Dad's room was at the end of the hall, door closed. The guest room was to the left, door also closed. And my room was to the right, behind a door that had once been covered with stickers and posters and a sign that said, Sarah's space, knock first, in my 12-year-old handwriting. The door was closed, but there was something else. A small, professional-looking sign hung where my nameplate used to be. In elegant script, it read, Lily's Energy Studio, by appointment only. Lily's Energy Studio, not Kelly's. Lily's. My hands were shaking as I reached for the doorknob. Part of me already knew what I was going to find, but knowing and seeing are 2 completely different things. I turned the handle and pushed open the door to my childhood bedroom. The first thing I saw was a woman I didn't recognize sitting in what used to be the corner where my desk had been. She was maybe 40, with short brown hair, and she was getting a pedicure from another woman I didn't recognize. Neither of them looked up when I opened the door. The second thing I saw was that my room was completely, utterly gone. Where my bed had been, there were 2 massage chairs with foot baths. Where my bookshelf had been, there were shelves lined with nail polish bottles in every color imaginable. My walls, once covered with posters of horses and inspirational quotes, were now painted a soft pink and decorated with certificates and awards for best manicure and customer service excellence. But the thing that made my knees go weak, the thing that made the whole world tilt sideways, was the window. My bedroom window, the one I'd looked out every morning to see the old oak tree where I'd hung a tire swing with Dad, had been expanded, cut wider, and there was a small sign in the corner that read, Walk-in entrance. People were coming into my childhood bedroom through my bedroom window. Excuse me, the woman getting the pedicure said, finally looking up. I think this is a private session. I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. I could only stand there, staring at the complete erasure of everything I'd been, everything I'd belonged to. Sarah? Kelly's voice behind me was sharp, angry. I turned around, and for the first time in 16 years, I saw real fear in her eyes. You need to leave, now. This is my room, I whispered. No, she said, stepping closer. It's not. It hasn't been your room for a very long time. The woman getting the pedicure was staring now, clearly uncomfortable. Her nail technician had stopped working, polish brush suspended in midair. But my things? What things? Kelly's voice was getting louder. You left 16 years ago, Sarah. People move on. Life moves on. I didn't leave. I was sent away. You were sent to get an education, to get opportunities you never would have had here. I was 15 years old, and now you're 31, with your own life, your own apartment, your own career. This is my life now. My life, my room, my window, my memories, all of it erased, painted over, converted into something that made money for the woman who'd convinced my father I was too much trouble to keep around. I backed out of the room, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Kelly followed me into the hallway, closing the door firmly behind her. I know this is a shock, she said, her voice softer now, more careful. But your father needed the income. His pension isn't enough anymore. And with his medical bills... Medical bills? She paused, clearly realizing she'd said something she hadn't meant to. He's been having some health issues. Nothing serious, but doctors are expensive. What kind of health issues? Memory problems? Confusion? Dr. Martinez thinks it might be early-stage dementia. The word hit me like a physical blow. Dementia. Dad. My dad, who'd taught me to ride a bike and helped me with algebra homework and used to make up silly songs to cheer me up when I was sad. How long? I managed to ask. We've known for about 2 years. It's getting worse. 2 years. 2 years. And no one had called me. No one had thought I might want to know that my father was losing his mind, piece by piece. Why didn't anyone tell me? Kelly looked genuinely surprised. Tell you what? About Dad. About his diagnosis. About any of this. Sarah, you haven't been part of this family for 16 years. You made that choice when you decided never to come home. I made that choice? My voice was getting louder, and I didn't care. I was a child. I was sent away because you didn't like my energy, remember? Because I was too intense, too emotional, too much work for you to deal with. You were troubled. You were angry all the time, hostile to me, disrespectful to your father. My mother had just died, and we all grieved her. But life had to go on. Life had to go on. For her, maybe. For me, life had stopped the day they'd packed my bags and driven me to Riverside Academy, a boarding school 3 states away that specialized in difficult teenagers from wealthy families. I'd spent my 16th birthday in a dorm room with a girl named Amy, who'd been sent away for shoplifting. I'd graduated high school without a single family member in the audience. I'd gotten accepted to college, earned my degree in social work, started a career helping kids who'd been abandoned by their families, all while pretending I wasn't one of them myself. And while I'd been building a life from nothing, Kelly had been turning my childhood bedroom into a nail salon. I need some air, I said. I walked past her, down the stairs, past Dad, who was still reading his newspaper in the living room, and out the front door. I sat on the porch steps, where I'd waited for the school bus every morning, where I'd carved my initials in the wood when I was 10, where Mom used to sit with me on summer evenings and count fireflies. My phone buzzed. A text from my friend Jamie, back in Chicago. How's the family reunion going? How was it going? I just discovered that my childhood had been literally erased and turned into a business, that my father was losing his memory and no one had bothered to tell me, that the woman who'd spent my teenage years convincing everyone I was too difficult to love had spent the last 16 years living in a house that should have been partly mine, profiting off the space where I'd once felt safe. I looked up at my old bedroom window, now wide enough for strangers to climb through for manicures, and realized that this was just the beginning. If Kelly had been comfortable enough to turn my room into a nail salon, If she'd been making medical decisions for Dad without involving me, if she'd been telling people I'd chosen to stay away, what else had she been doing for the past 16 years? What else had she taken from me while I'd been trying to build a life out of the scraps she'd left me with? I pulled out my phone and started making a list. Names of people I needed to call, questions I needed to ask, records I needed to see, because 16 years ago, I'd been a 15-year-old girl with no power, no voice, no choice, but to accept what the adults in my life decided was best for me. But I wasn't 15 anymore, and I was about to find out exactly what had been done to me while I was gone. The first call I made was to my Aunt Rachel, Mom's younger sister who lived 2 hours away in Detroit. Rachel had always been the family member who remembered birthdays, who sent Christmas cards, who kept track of everyone's lives, even when they didn't keep track of hers. "Sarah?" Her voice was surprised but warm. "Honey, how are you? It's been too long." "I'm at Dad's house," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Rachel, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." There was a pause. "Okay? What's going on?" "Did you know that Kelly turned my bedroom into a nail salon?" The silence that followed was so long, I thought the call had dropped. Then Rachel's voice came back, quieter now, careful. "Sarah, where are you right now?" "Sitting on the front porch. Why?" "Can Kelly hear you?" "I don't think so." "Rachel, did you know?" I knew she was running some kind of business from the house. Your father mentioned it a few months ago, but he was so confused about the details. I thought maybe she was doing hair or something in the basement. She cut a hole in my bedroom wall so people could climb through the window. There were strangers getting pedicures where my bed used to be. Jesus Christ. Rachel's voice was barely a whisper. "Sarah, there's something else you need to know." My stomach dropped. "What?" "I've been trying to get your father to call you for months. Every time I suggest it, he gets this panicked look and says you're too busy, that you don't want to be bothered with family stuff. I thought maybe you two had some kind of fight I didn't know about." "We didn't have a fight. I've been calling him every few months, sending birthday cards, Christmas gifts. I thought he was the one who didn't want to talk." "That's impossible. I've been there when the mail comes. I've never seen anything from you." The pieces were starting to fall into place, and I didn't like the picture they were making. "Rachel, who's been handling Dad's mail?" "Kelly, mostly. She says it's easier since his memory started going. She pays his bills, handles his appointments, manages his medications." "All of it?" "All of it. Sarah, I tried to talk to him about setting up some kind of power of attorney situation with both of us involved, but Kelly said you weren't interested in being involved." I closed my eyes and tried not to scream. 16 years. 16 years of Kelly controlling the narrative, making decisions, shaping Dad's reality. And now, with his memory failing, she was the only voice he trusted. Has he been getting worse lately? Much worse. Last month, he didn't recognize me at first, and he keeps talking about your mother like she's still alive. Kelly says the doctor thinks he should avoid stressful situations, so she limits his visitors. She limits his visitors? She says too much stimulation makes him confused, that it's better if he has a quiet, predictable routine. A quiet, predictable routine that apparently included strangers tramping through his house for nail services, but didn't include phone calls from his only daughter. "Rachel, I need to see Dad's medical records. I need to talk to his doctor." "You'll need his permission for that, or Kelly's. She has his medical power of attorney." Of course she did. After I hung up with Rachel, I sat on those porch steps for another hour, watching cars drive by on the street where I'd learned to ride a bike. Normal people living normal lives, probably having no idea that just a few feet away, someone's entire history was being systematically erased. When I finally went back inside, Dad was napping in his chair, and Kelly was in the kitchen, cleaning up lunch dishes I hadn't seen her make. "We need to talk," I said. She didn't look up from the sink. "I think we've talked enough for one day." "Kelly, look at me." She turned around, and I saw something I'd never seen before. She looked tired. Not just regular tired, but bone-deep exhausted, like she'd been carrying a weight for years that was finally getting too heavy. "I know you think I abandoned Dad," I said, "but I've been trying to stay in touch. I've been sending letters, cards, gifts. I've been calling. I wouldn't know anything about that." "Because you've been intercepting my mail." Her face went very still. "That's a serious accusation." "It's not an accusation. It's a fact. And we both know it." She dried her hands on a dish towel, taking her time, thinking. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, less defensive, more calculated. "Your father gets upset when he hears from you." "Upset how?" "Confused, agitated. He starts asking questions about why you don't visit, why you don't call. It breaks his heart, Sarah. So yes, I've been protecting him from that pain. By lying to him, by managing his stress levels. The doctor said emotional upheaval can accelerate his decline." "What doctor? I want his name and number." "Dr. Martinez. But he won't talk to you without proper authorization." "Then give me proper authorization." Kelly hung up the dish towel and leaned against the counter, studying me like I was a problem she needed to solve. "What do you want, Sarah?" "I want to be part of my father's life. I want to be involved in his care. I want to see his medical records and talk to his doctors and make sure he's getting the help he needs." "And then what? You'll go back to Chicago and forget about us for another 3 years?" The question hit harder than I expected, because there was truth in it. I had stayed away for 3 years after my last visit. But that visit had been such a disaster, with Kelly making snide comments and Dad seeming uncomfortable and distant, that I'd convinced myself they were better off without me. "I don't know," I said honestly, "but I know I can't keep pretending this family doesn't exist." "This family," Kelly's voice was bitter now. "You've never considered me family, Sarah. From the day I moved in here, you made it clear I was an intruder." "You were an intruder. Mom had been dead for less than a year. And your father was dying of loneliness. He needed someone to help him rebuild his life. He needed time to grieve. We both did. He needed to move forward. You needed to move forward. But all you wanted to do was stay stuck in the past, turning this house into some kind of shrine to your mother." The words stung because they weren't entirely wrong. I had wanted to keep everything exactly the way Mom had left it. Her coffee mug in the kitchen cabinet, her books on the nightstand, her gardening gloves by the back door. I'd fought Kelly on every change, every improvement, every sign that life was moving on without Mom. But I'd been 13 years old. I'd been a child who'd lost her mother and was watching her father fall in love with someone else before I'd even figured out how to exist in a world without Mom in it. "I was a kid," I said. "I was a grieving kid who needed help, not exile. You needed structure. You needed boundaries. You needed to learn that you couldn't control everything and everyone around you. I needed my family. We were your family. I tried to be your family. You tried to replace my mother. I tried to love you." The words hung between us, and for a moment, I almost believed her. Kelly had been young when she'd married Dad, only 28 to his 42. She'd gone from being a single woman with her own apartment and her own life to being a stepmother to a traumatized teenager who hated her on sight. But then I remembered the nail salon upstairs, the window cut wide so strangers could climb into my childhood bedroom, the systematic isolation of my father, the intercepted letters and blocked phone calls. If you tried to love me, why did you erase me? I didn't erase you. I helped you become independent. You turned my bedroom into a business. After you'd been gone for over a decade, after it became clear you were never coming back, I would have come back if anyone had ever made me feel welcome. You would have come back if you'd wanted to come back. But you didn't, Sarah. You built a whole life without us. You have friends, a career, a future that has nothing to do with this house or this family. So don't stand there and act like we stole something from you when you're the one who walked away. She was right about some of it. I had built a life without them. I'd had to, but she was also rewriting history in a way that made her the victim and me the villain. And I'd heard that story too many times to believe it anymore. I want to take Dad to dinner tonight, I said. Just the two of us. He gets confused in new environments. Then we'll go somewhere familiar, the diner on Main Street. He used to take me there every Saturday morning. Kelly's expression tightened. The diner closed 3 years ago. Of course it did. Another piece of my past gone. Then somewhere else. Somewhere he likes. Sarah, I don't think that's a good idea. I'm not asking for your permission. Actually, you are. I'm his primary caregiver. I'm responsible for his well-being. You're not his daughter. No, I'm his wife. I'm the one who's been here every day for the past 16 years, taking care of him, managing his medications, dealing with his confusion and fear and anger. I'm the one who sits with him when he has nightmares about your mother dying. I'm the one who holds his hand when he forgets where he is. Her voice was shaking now, and I could see tears in her eyes. Real tears, not the manipulative kind she'd used when I was a teenager. I'm not trying to take him away from you, I said, softening my tone. I just want to spend some time with him. And then you'll leave again, and he'll be heartbroken again, and I'll be the one who has to pick up the pieces. Maybe I won't leave. The words came out before I'd really thought about them. But as soon as I said them, I realized they might be true. My job in Chicago was fine, but it wasn't a calling. My apartment was nice, but it wasn't home. I had friends, but no one who really knew me. No one who remembered the little girl who'd hidden under her bed during thunderstorms or who'd insisted on wearing her Halloween costume to church in November. Kelly stared at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. What do you mean? I mean, maybe it's time I came home. This isn't your home anymore. It's my father's home, and he's my father. He's also my husband, and this is also my home. I've put 16 years of my life into this house, this marriage, this family. I'm not going to step aside just because you've suddenly decided you want to play daughter. Play daughter. Like being his child was a role I'd auditioned for instead of something I'd been born into. I'm not asking you to step aside. I'm asking you to make room. There is no room, Sarah. There's barely enough space for the life we've already built. Then maybe we need to build something bigger. That night, Dad and I did go out to dinner. Not to the diner that had closed, but to a family restaurant near the mall that he said he liked. Kelly came with us, of course, sitting between Dad and me like a human buffer, cutting his food and reminding him to take his pills. Dad seemed happy to be out, asking the waitress about her family and commenting on how much the town had changed. But I could see the confusion creeping in around the edges. He asked me twice what I did for work, and at one point, he called me by Mom's name. Linda, do you remember that time we took Sarah to the state fair, and she got so sick on the tilt-a-whirl? I'm Sarah, Dad. Mom's not here. His face crumpled for just a moment, like someone had told him devastating news. Then Kelly reached over and squeezed his hand. It's okay, Frank. Sarah's here visiting us. Isn't that nice? Sarah. He looked at me like he was trying to place me. You've gotten so tall. I was 31 years old, and I hadn't grown an inch since I was 16. But in his mind, I was still the 15-year-old girl who'd been sent away to boarding school, the girl who'd never come home. After dinner, we drove around town for a while. Dad pointed out changes, new buildings, old landmarks that were gone. The movie theater, where I'd seen my first PG-13 movie, had become a Dollar General. The park, where I'd played softball, had been turned into a shopping center. "Everything's different now," Dad said, staring out the window. "I can't keep up with all the changes." "Some things are still the same," I said. "The house is still there. The oak tree in the backyard. Your workshop in the garage." "My workshop?" He looked confused. "I don't have a workshop anymore." I glanced at Kelly in the rearview mirror. "What happened to Dad's workshop?" "We converted it," she said. "More storage space for the business." The business. Everything came back to the business. Dad's workshop, where he'd taught me to use a screwdriver and shown me how to sand wood smooth, had been converted into storage for nail polish and pedicure supplies. When we got home, Dad went straight to bed, exhausted from the outing. Kelly and I stood in the kitchen, the silence stretching between us like a chasm. "He's getting worse," I said. "I know. How long do the doctors think?" "He could have years left, or months. There's no way to know. The progression is different for everyone." "I want to help." Kelly looked at me for a long moment, and I could see her calculating something. Finally, she sighed. "There's something you need to see." She led me to the dining room, where she opened a cabinet I remembered being full of Mom's good china. Instead of dishes, it was stuffed with papers, bills, medical records, insurance documents, legal papers. "Your father's medical expenses are enormous," she said, pulling out a stack of bills. "The medication alone is $1,200 a month. The doctor visits, the tests, the specialists. Insurance covers some of it, but not nearly enough." I looked at the numbers on the bills, and my stomach dropped. Thousands and thousands of dollars every month. "His pension covers the basics," Kelly continued. "The mortgage, utilities, food, but the medical bills were going to bankrupt us. That's why I started the nail salon." "How much does the salon bring in?" "On a good month, maybe $3,000. On a bad month, half that." It wasn't enough. Even I could see that. The bills in front of me added up to more than the salon could possibly cover. "Kelly, how are you paying for all of this?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she pulled out another stack of papers, bank statements, credit card bills, loan documents. "I've been borrowing against the house," she said quietly, "taking out loans, using credit cards. I know it's not sustainable, but what else was I supposed to do? Let him go without his medication? Stop taking him to the doctor?" I stared at the papers, trying to make sense of the numbers. Credit card debt in the tens of thousands. A second mortgage on the house, medical bills that kept coming no matter how much she paid. "Why didn't you call me?" "And say what? That your father, who you haven't visited in 3 years, needs money for medical bills? That the man you couldn't be bothered to have a relationship with is dying by degrees and it's costing more than we can afford? You could have tried." "I did try, Sarah. I tried for years to get you to be part of this family. But every time I reached out, you made it clear you weren't interested." "When? When did you reach out?" She pulled out a folder I hadn't noticed before. Inside were copies of letters, emails, Christmas cards, all addressed to me, all returned or bounced back. "Your address kept changing," she said. "You moved so much in your 20s, and you never told us where you were going. When I finally found your current address 2 years ago, I sent you a letter about your father's diagnosis. It came back marked, 'Return to sender.'" I stared at the envelope. It was addressed to an apartment I'd lived in briefly 3 years ago, right after a bad breakup when I'd needed to get away from my ex-boyfriend's neighborhood. I'd forwarded my mail for 6 months, but maybe something had gotten lost in the shuffle. "I never got this." "I know. I tried calling the number I had for you, but it was disconnected." It had been disconnected. I'd changed my number after the breakup, trying to cut all ties with that period of my life. I tried reaching out through social media, but your profiles were all private. They were private. I'd learned early in my social work career that having a public online presence could be dangerous when working with volatile families. I even called your college, trying to get updated contact information, but they said privacy laws prevented them from giving out details about former students. Every excuse I'd built up over the years, every reason I'd had for staying away, was crumbling around me. Kelly had tried to reach me. She tried to tell me Dad was sick. She tried to include me in the decisions that were shaping his care. And I'd been unreachable, unavailable, living my carefully constructed life in Chicago while my father's mind slowly disappeared, and the woman I'd spent 16 years hating tried desperately to keep him alive and safe. I should have tried harder, I said. Maybe this is just how things were supposed to happen. What do you mean? Kelly sat down at the dining room table, suddenly looking every one of her 44 years. Maybe you needed to build your own life first. Maybe you needed to become the person you are now before you could come back and deal with this. And who am I now? Strong, independent, someone who can handle hard truths without falling apart. She gestured at the bills spread across the table. The 15-year-old girl I sent away to boarding school couldn't have handled this. She would have crumbled under the weight of it all. Maybe the 15-year-old girl could have grown up handling it if she'd been given the chance. Maybe, but we'll never know, will we? We sat in silence for a few minutes, looking at the evidence of Dad's decline spread out between us. Medical bills and bank statements and credit card debt that told the story of a man losing his mind while the people who loved him tried desperately to keep him whole. What happens now? I asked. I don't know. The doctors say he might have 2 good years left, or 5 bad ones. The money will run out long before either of those timelines. What about selling the house? We've talked about it, but where would we go? He's lived here for 30 years. This is the only place he still recognizes consistently. I thought about my savings account in Chicago, the money I'd been putting away for a house I wasn't sure I wanted, a future I couldn't quite picture. It wasn't enough to solve everything, but it might buy us some time. I have some money, I said. Kelly looked at me sharply. I'm not asking you for money. I know, I'm offering. Sarah, you can't just throw money at this and make it go away. This isn't a problem you can solve by writing a check. Then what kind of problem is it? She was quiet for a long time, staring at a medical bill for a CT scan that had cost more than most people made in a month. The kind that doesn't have a solution, she said finally. The kind where you just keep fighting until you can't fight anymore. But looking at her across that table, surrounded by the evidence of everything she'd been carrying alone for 2 years, I realized she was wrong. It wasn't a problem that could be solved with money or willpower or good intentions, but it also wasn't a problem she had to carry alone anymore. What I discovered in that dining room changed everything I thought I knew about the past 16 years. Tell me in the comments, have you ever discovered that someone you thought was your enemy was actually trying to protect you? The next morning, I woke up with a plan. Not a good plan, maybe, but a plan nonetheless. I was going to take a leave of absence from my job in Chicago. I was going to stay here and help figure out Dad's care. I was going to try to build some kind of relationship with the man who was forgetting me a little more each day. What I didn't plan on was waking up to the sound of power tools coming from my old bedroom. I threw on clothes and ran upstairs, where I found Kelly directing 2 men as they installed what looked like a professional-grade ventilation system in the window that used to frame my view of the oak tree. What's happening? I asked. City inspector came by yesterday afternoon, Kelly said without looking at me. said we needed better air circulation if we're going to keep operating the salon. Inspector? Someone called in a complaint about a home business operating without proper permits. The two men working on the window were big, professional-looking guys with Martinez Brothers Construction embroidered on their shirts. They moved with the efficiency of people who'd done this kind of work 1,000 times before. "How much is this costing?" I asked. "More than we have," Kelly said flatly. "But if we don't do it, they'll shut us down completely." I watched them work for a few minutes, thinking about the stack of bills I'd seen the night before. Kelly couldn't afford this upgrade, but she also couldn't afford to lose the income from the salon. "Kelly, can I ask you something?" "Shoot." "When you first started the salon, did you get all the proper permits?" She stopped directing the workers and turned to look at me. "What kind of question is that?" "An important one, because if someone reported you for operating without permits, that means someone has been watching this place, someone who knows enough about business regulations to know what to look for." "Sarah, what are you getting at?" "I'm getting at the fact that 16 years ago, you were 28 years old, working as a secretary at the insurance company downtown. You didn't know anything about running a business. So when you decided to start this salon, how did you know what permits to get? How did you know what regulations to follow?" Kelly's face went very still. "I figured it out as I went along." "Did you? Or did you just hope no one would notice?" The workers had stopped what they were doing and were obviously listening to our conversation. Kelly noticed too and gestured for them to take a break outside. Once we were alone, she turned back to me with an expression I couldn't read. "Fine," she said. "No, I didn't get all the proper permits when I started. I was desperate, Sarah. Your father's medical bills were piling up, and I needed income fast. I figured I'd deal with the paperwork later." "How much later?" "I kept meaning to handle it, but the requirements kept changing, and the fees kept going up. And honestly, I was so overwhelmed with everything else." "Kelly, how long has the salon been operating without permits?" 3 years. 3 years. 3 years of running an illegal business out of my childhood bedroom while Dad's mind slowly deteriorated and the bills kept piling up. Do you have any idea how much trouble you could be in? Do you have any idea how much trouble we were already in?" Kelly's voice was rising now, defensive and scared. "I did what I had to do to keep this family afloat. By breaking the law. By surviving. Sometimes that's the same thing." I thought about the clients I'd worked with in Chicago. Families pushed to the edge by poverty, illness, systems that didn't work. I'd seen people make choices they never thought they'd make just to keep their heads above water. But I'd also seen what happened when those choices caught up with them. "Kelly, who do you think called in the complaint?" She was quiet for a long time, staring out the window where the workers were smoking cigarettes and checking their phones. "I have some suspicions," she said finally. "Tell me." "There's a woman named Patricia Vance who lives 3 houses down. She's been complaining about the traffic ever since I started the salon. Says people parking on the street for appointments is ruining the neighborhood character." I remembered Patricia Vance. She'd been the neighborhood busybody when I was a kid, always peering out her front window and commenting on everyone else's business. "Has she threatened to report you before?" "Multiple times. Last month, she cornered me at the grocery store and said if I didn't shut down the salon, she'd make sure the city did it for me." "And you didn't think to get the permits after that?" "Sarah, do you know how much it costs to get a home business permit for a personal care service? How many inspections are required? How many health department approvals?" I didn't know, but I was starting to get the picture. "Thousands of dollars," Kelly continued. "Thousands of dollars we don't have for a business that barely makes enough to cover Dad's medication." "So what's the plan now?" "I don't know. The inspector said if I don't have everything up to code within 30 days, they'll issue a cease and desist order. No more salon, no more income. And if you do get everything up to code, then I'll be in debt even deeper than I already am. But at least I'll be legally in debt. We stood there in my old bedroom, surrounded by the tools and equipment that had replaced my childhood, and I tried to figure out how to feel about everything I was learning. Kelly had turned my room into a business, yes, but she'd done it to try to save my father's life. She'd been operating illegally, yes, but she'd been operating at all because the legal ways of making money weren't enough to cover the cost of keeping a sick man alive. There's something else, Kelly said. Something I probably should have told you last night. My stomach dropped. What? Your father's name isn't on the deed to this house anymore. What do you mean? I mean, when we needed to take out the second mortgage 2 years ago, the bank required me to put the house entirely in my name. Something about his mental state making him unable to make financial decisions. The room tilted around me. So Dad doesn't own this house? Legally? No, I do. But he's lived here for 30 years. I know, and he'll keep living here as long as I'm alive and able to take care of him. But if something happens to me, if I die or become incapacitated, the house would go to your family, not to Dad, not to me. That's right. I sat down hard on one of the pedicure chairs, trying to process what this meant. Not only had my childhood been erased and turned into a business, but the house itself, the place where my parents had built their life together, where Mom had died, where Dad was slowly losing his memory, belonged entirely to Kelly now. Why are you telling me this? Because you said you wanted to help. And if you're going to help, you need to understand the whole situation. The whole situation being that you own everything and I own nothing. The whole situation being that I'm drowning, Sarah. I'm 44 years old. I've spent the last 16 years taking care of a man whose memory is disappearing. I've destroyed my credit trying to pay for medical treatments that aren't working. And I'm about to lose the only source of income I have because some bitter old woman doesn't like seeing cars parked on her street. Kelly's voice broke on the last word, and for the first time since I'd arrived, I saw her cry. Not angry tears or manipulative tears, but the exhausted tears of someone who'd been holding everything together for too long. Kelly, I know you hate me, she said. I know you think I stole your family and erased your childhood and turned you into some kind of refugee from your own life. And maybe you're right about some of that, but I've been fighting to keep your father alive and safe for 2 years, and I'm losing that fight, and I don't know what else to do. I wanted to comfort her, but I also wanted to shake her. She'd made so many decisions without involving me, cut me out of so many important moments, and now she was asking for my help when everything was already falling apart. But looking at her standing in my old bedroom, surrounded by the evidence of her desperate attempts to keep Dad alive, I realized that blame wasn't going to solve anything. Okay, I said. What do we need to do? She wiped her eyes and looked at me like she wasn't sure she'd heard correctly. What? To get the permits, to make the salon legal, to keep it running until we can figure out something better. What do we need to do? Sarah, you don't understand how much this is going to cost. I have some savings, and I know people who might be able to help with the legal stuff. Why would you do that? It was a good question. Why would I help the woman who'd sent me away, who'd erased my childhood, who'd kept me away from my father for years? Why would I invest my money in a business I'd never wanted, in a house that wasn't even legally mine anymore? Because he's my dad, I said. And because you're right. I can't solve this by writing a check and walking away. But I can't walk away, period. Kelly stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her trying to figure out if this was some kind of trick. There would have to be conditions, she said finally. What kind of conditions? I'd want you to be a legal partner in the business. Equal ownership, equal responsibility, equal decision-making power. Even though it's your house, especially because it's my house. If we're going to do this, we're going to do it right. No more cutting corners. No more hoping no one notices. We get the permits. We follow the regulations. We run a legitimate business. And if it doesn't work, if we can't make enough money to cover Dad's expenses, then we figure out Plan B together. I looked around my old bedroom, trying to imagine myself as a co-owner of a nail salon. It wasn't exactly the life plan I'd had when I'd moved to Chicago, but then again, most of my life hadn't gone according to plan. There's one more thing, I said. What? I want Dad to be involved in the decisions about his care, as much as he's able to be. I know his memory is going, but he should still have a voice in what happens to him. Kelly hesitated. Sarah, he gets confused. Sometimes he doesn't understand what's happening. Sometimes, but not always. And when he's clear, when he's himself, he should get to choose. What if he chooses something that's not good for him? Then we deal with that when it happens. But I won't be part of making decisions about his life without including him. It was Kelly's turn to think. I could see her weighing the pros and cons, trying to figure out if she could trust me to help without trying to take over. Okay, she said finally. Partners. Partners? We shook hands there in my old bedroom, surrounded by pedicure chairs and nail polish displays. And I wondered what Mom would think about her daughter going into business with the woman who'd replaced her. The next few days were a blur of phone calls, paperwork, and reality checks about what it actually took to run a legal business. I called my friend Marcus, who worked as a small business attorney in Chicago, and he agreed to help us navigate the permit process. I called my boss and explained that I needed to take an extended leave of absence for a family emergency. I called my landlord and put my apartment on the market for subletting. Each phone call felt like I was dismantling my carefully constructed Chicago life piece by piece. Marcus drove up from Chicago that weekend with a briefcase full of paperwork and a grim expression. "Ladies," he said, settling into Dad's kitchen table with his laptop and a stack of legal documents, "I'm going to be straight with you. What you're trying to do is possible, but it's going to be expensive and complicated." "How expensive?" Kelly asked. "To get all the permits, pass all the inspections, and bring everything up to code, you're looking at somewhere between $15,000 and $20,000. I felt the blood drain from my face. $20,000 was most of my savings. "And that's just to get legal," Marcus continued. "To actually make the business profitable enough to justify that investment, you're going to need to expand your client base significantly." "How significantly?" I asked. "Right now, you're probably seeing what, 15 to 20 clients a week?" "On a good week," Kelly said, "you'd need to be seeing at least 40 to 50 clients a week to make the numbers work. That means longer hours, more staff, better marketing, professional equipment." "More staff means more expenses," Kelly pointed out. "It does, but it also means more revenue potential. The question is whether you're willing to turn this from a side business into a real business." Kelly and I looked at each other across the table. A real business meant a real commitment. It meant staying here, working together, building something that neither of us had planned. "What's the alternative?" I asked. "You shut down the salon, Kelly goes back to working for someone else, and you find other ways to cover your father's medical expenses." "Such as?" Marcus pulled out another set of papers. "Medicaid. If you can prove that his assets have been depleted, he might qualify for assistance with long-term care." "What would that involve?" "Probably moving him to a facility. Medicaid doesn't typically cover in-home care at the level he's going to need as his condition progresses." The room went quiet. Dad was upstairs taking his afternoon nap, probably dreaming about a time when his mind was clear and his future was certain. The idea of moving him to a nursing home, away from the house where he'd lived for 30 years, felt like another kind of death. "How long do we have to decide?" Kelly asked. "The city gave you 30 days to get compliant. That was a week ago, so you have 3 weeks to either get legal or shut down. And if we get legal, but the business doesn't work out, then you'll have spent $20,000 learning an expensive lesson about the nail salon industry." After Marcus left, Kelly and I sat in the kitchen with his paperwork spread between us, trying to make a decision that felt impossible either way. "What do you think?" Kelly asked. "I think we're both crazy for even considering this. But I also think we don't have much choice. If we don't try, we'll always wonder if we could have made it work. And if we try and fail, then at least we'll fail together instead of separately." Kelly smiled at that, the first real smile I'd seen from her since I'd arrived. "Partners in crime," she said. "Partners in nail care," I corrected. "Same thing, really." That night, I called Rachel to tell her about the plan. She listened quietly while I explained about the permits, the money, the decision to stay and help. "Sarah," she said when I finished, "are you sure about this?" "No, but I'm sure about Dad needing help, and I'm sure about not wanting to regret not trying." "What about your job? Your life in Chicago?" "My job will still be there if this doesn't work out. And my life in Chicago," I paused, trying to figure out how to explain it. "My life in Chicago was fine, safe, predictable, but it wasn't really mine, you know? It was just the life I built to prove I could survive without family. And now I want to see if I can build something with family instead of despite it. Even with Kelly? Especially with Kelly. I spent 16 years thinking she was the villain in my story. Maybe it's time I found out who she really is. And if you don't like what you find, then at least I'll know for sure." After I hung up with Rachel, I went upstairs to check on Dad. He was awake, sitting on the edge of his bed, looking confused and a little scared. "Dad, are you okay?" "I don't remember going to bed," he said. "And I don't remember why I'm here." "You're in your bedroom, in your house. You took a nap this afternoon." "My house." He looked around, like he was seeing the room for the first time. "Where's Linda?" "Mom's not here anymore, Dad. Remember? She died when I was 12. His face crumpled, and for a moment, he looked like a lost child. "She died?" "A long time ago. But Kelly's here, and I'm here." "Kelly? Your wife. She takes care of you." "And you are?" The question hit me like a physical blow. "I'm Sarah, your daughter." He studied my face for a long time, and I could see him trying to place me in the catalog of his fading memory. "Sarah," he said finally, "you used to live here." "I did. And now I'm going to live here again." "That's nice. I get lonely sometimes." I sat down next to him on the bed and took his hand. His skin was thin and soft, like paper that had been folded and unfolded too many times. "Dad, I'm sorry I stayed away so long." "Did you stay away?" "For 16 years. I should have come home sooner." 16 years! He repeated the number like he was trying to make sense of it. "That's a very long time." "It is." "But you're here now." "I'm here now." He squeezed my hand, and for just a moment, his eyes cleared, and I could see the father I remembered, the man who taught me to ride a bike and helped me with homework and made up silly songs to cheer me up. "I'm glad you came home, sweetheart," he said. "I missed you." But the moment I discovered the real reason someone had reported Kelly's salon to the city, everything I thought I knew about our situation changed completely. Can you guess who was really behind the complaint? It was Tuesday morning when I found the answer, and it came from the most unexpected source. I was in the kitchen making coffee when Dad shuffled in, looking more alert than he had in days. "Sarah," he said. "There's something I need to tell you about Patricia." Patricia Vance, the neighbor Kelly suspected of reporting the salon. "What about her, Dad?" "She came by yesterday while you and Kelly were at the lawyer's office." My blood went cold. "She came inside the house?" "She said she was worried about me. Said she'd been watching the house and noticed I was alone." "Dad, you're not supposed to let strangers in when Kelly and I aren't here." "She's not a stranger. I've known Patricia for 20 years. His voice was getting agitated, the way it did when he felt like he was being treated like a child. "Okay, you're right. What did she want?" Dad sat down at the kitchen table, his hands shaking slightly as he reached for his coffee mug. "She said she knew about Kelly's business troubles. Said she wanted to help." "Help how?" "She offered to buy the house." The coffee mug slipped from my hands and shattered on the kitchen floor. "She what?" "She said she'd been thinking about buying a bigger place for her son's family, and our house would be perfect. Said she could offer us enough money to pay off all of Kelly's debts and still have some left over." I stared at Dad, trying to process what he'd just told me. Patricia Vance, the woman who'd supposedly been complaining about the salon's impact on the neighborhood, wanted to buy our house? "Dad, what did you tell her?" "I told her I'd have to talk to Kelly. And to you." He looked confused again, like he wasn't quite sure why he'd said that. "This is still my house, isn't it?" "Legally, no." But I wasn't about to explain that to him while he was already confused. "Of course it's your house, Dad. Did Patricia say anything else?" "She asked a lot of questions about Kelly's business, about the permits and the inspections. She seemed to know an awful lot about the whole situation." "She seemed to know an awful lot. Too much, maybe." "Dad, I need you to promise me something. If Patricia comes by again when Kelly and I aren't here, don't let her in. Don't discuss the house or the business with her. Just tell her we'll call her back." "But she's been so helpful." "Helpful how?" "She's the one who told me about the city inspector. She said she'd heard through her network that someone had reported the salon, and she wanted to warn us so we could prepare." The pieces were starting to fall into place, and I didn't like the picture they were making. Patricia Vance hadn't just reported the salon to the city. She'd also made sure we knew about the report. She'd created the problem and then positioned herself as someone trying to help us solve it. And now she wanted to buy the house. "Dad, when exactly did Patricia tell you about the city inspector?" "A few days before he showed up. She said her friend at City Hall had given her a heads up." "Her friend at City Hall? She knows a lot of people. She's lived here longer than any of us." I left Dad finishing his coffee and went upstairs to find Kelly, who was in the salon doing inventory for the permit application. "Kelly, we need to talk. If it's about the ventilation system, the guys said they'll be back this afternoon to finish the installation." "It's not about the ventilation system. It's about Patricia Vance." Kelly looked up from her clipboard. "What about her?" "I don't think she's the one who reported you to the city. Sarah, she literally threatened to report me. I think she reported you, but I don't think that was her real goal." I told Kelly what Dad had said about Patricia's visit, her offer to buy the house, her convenient warning about the city inspector. "She created a crisis so she could swoop in with a solution," I said. "Report the salon, make sure we knew about the inspection, then offer to buy the house when we couldn't afford to fix the problems." Kelly set down her clipboard and stared at me. "That's actually brilliant and completely evil." "It gets worse. Dad said she seemed to know a lot about your financial situation, more than a nosy neighbor should know." "How could she know about that?" "Good question. Have you told anyone about the debts? The medical bills?" "Just you and Marcus and—" Kelly's face went pale. "Oh, shit." "What?" "Last year, when things were really bad, I applied for a loan at the bank. Patricia's son works there, in the loan department. So he would have seen your application. All of it. The house title, the debts, the medical expenses, everything. We stood there in my old bedroom, surrounded by nail polish and pedicure chairs, and I felt like I was looking at a crime scene. Patricia Vance hadn't just been watching our house out of neighborhood nosiness. She'd been gathering intelligence, waiting for the right moment to make her move. "Kelly, how much do you think this house is worth?" "I don't know. I haven't had it appraised recently." "Guess. Maybe 300,000? Houses in this neighborhood have been going up in value." $300,000. Enough to pay off all of Kelly's debts, cover Dad's medical expenses for years, and still leave a substantial profit for Patricia Vance. "We need to find out exactly what she's planning," I said. "How?" "By letting her think her plan is working." That afternoon, I called Patricia Vance and asked if I could come over to discuss her offer to buy the house. She agreed immediately, a little too eagerly. Patricia's house was 3 doors down from ours, a neat colonial with perfectly manicured landscaping and garden gnomes that looked like they'd been arranged with a ruler. She answered the door wearing a floral blouse and too much perfume, smiling like we were old friends reuniting after years apart. "Sarah, my goodness, you look exactly like your mother did at your age." She'd never met my mother. Mom had died before Patricia moved to the neighborhood. "Thank you," I said. "I appreciate you taking the time to talk with me about your offer." "Of course, dear. Come in. Come in." I made tea. Her living room was immaculate, decorated in shades of beige and cream that made everything look expensive and untouchable. She poured tea from a china set that probably cost more than Kelly made in a month from the salon. "I hope your father explained my proposal correctly," Patricia said, settling into an armchair across from me. "I know his memory isn't what it used to be. He told me you're interested in buying our house." "Very interested. My son Derek and his wife are expecting their second child, and they need more space. Your house would be perfect for them." "It's a lovely thought, but I'm curious about something." "What's that, dear?" "Dad mentioned that you knew about Kelly's business troubles, about the city inspection and the permit issues." Patricia's smile faltered slightly. "Word gets around in a small neighborhood." "I'm sure it does, but you seem to know quite a lot of specific details about the debts, the medical bills, the timeline for getting compliant with city regulations. I pay attention to what's happening in my community." "And your son Derek, he works at First National Bank, doesn't he?" The teacup rattled against its saucer as Patricia set it down. "He does. Why?" "I'm just trying to understand how you knew so much about our financial situation. It's almost like you had access to private banking information." "I don't know what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. You knew Kelly had applied for a loan and been turned down. You knew about the medical expenses. You knew about the second mortgage. Information that would only be available to someone with access to banking records." Patricia's friendly demeanor was cracking around the edges. "Sarah, I think you're reading too much into casual neighborhood conversation." "Am I? Because here's what I think happened. I think your son told you about Kelly's loan application. I think you saw an opportunity to acquire a valuable property at below market value. So, you reported the salon to the city, knowing it would create a financial crisis that would force Kelly to consider selling. That's a very serious accusation." "Yes, it is. And if it's true, it's also illegal. Bank employees aren't allowed to share customer information with family members, and filing false reports with city agencies is fraud." Patricia stood up abruptly, her hands shaking. "I think this conversation is over. I think you're right, but before I go, I want you to know that Kelly and I have decided not to sell the house. We're going to get the permits, make the salon legal, and keep fighting for Dad's care. You'll regret that decision. Maybe, but at least it'll be our decision to regret. I left Patricia's house with confirmation of everything I'd suspected and evidence of things I hadn't even considered. She hadn't just been opportunistic. She'd been predatory, using inside information to target a family in crisis. But more importantly, I'd left her thinking that Kelly and I were naive and unprepared for what was coming next. When I got home, Kelly was waiting in the kitchen with a look on her face that told me she had news too. I called my friend Janet at the city planning office, she said, asked her some casual questions about the inspection process. And Patricia Vance has filed complaints about our house 3 times in the past 6 months. Not just about the salon, about the lawn maintenance, about Dad leaving his car parked on the street too long, about noise violations during our family dinners. She's been building a case. She's been trying to. But here's the interesting part. Janet said Patricia also submitted a formal inquiry about the property's zoning restrictions last month, asked specifically about the rules for converting residential properties to commercial use. She's been planning to turn our house into a commercial property. That's what it looks like. And if she could buy it from us below market value, she'd make a fortune converting it properly. I thought about Patricia's perfectly manicured house, her expensive china, her son's position at the bank. This wasn't just about getting a good deal on real estate. This was about someone with resources and connections systematically targeting a vulnerable family. Kelly, we need to document everything. Every interaction with Patricia, every complaint she's filed, every piece of information her son shouldn't have had access to. Why? Because we're not just going to save the salon. We're going to make sure Patricia Vance can't do this to anyone else. That evening, Kelly and I spread out at the dining room table with laptops, legal pads, and a timeline we were building of Patricia's campaign against our family. Dad joined us, surprisingly lucid and angry when he understood what had been happening. That woman has been in my house, he said, asking questions, pretending to be helpful, and all the time she was planning to steal it from us. We're not going to let that happen, Dad. What can we do? I'm just an old man with a broken brain. You're not broken, Dad, and you're not just anything. You're the legal owner of this house, and you have rights. Kelly said the house is in her name now. Kelly and I exchanged glances. We hadn't told Dad about the ownership transfer because we hadn't wanted to confuse him further. Dad, how did you know that? Patricia told me. She said Kelly had tricked me into signing over the deed when I wasn't thinking clearly. The words hit like a slap. Kelly's face went white. Dad, that's not what happened, I said. Kelly had to put the house in her name to get the second mortgage. It was the only way to pay for your medical treatment. But Patricia said, Patricia is lying. She's been lying about everything. Dad looked back and forth between Kelly and me, trying to sort through information that no longer made sense to his damaged mind. I don't know what's true anymore, he said finally. This is true, Kelly said, reaching across the table to take his hand. I love you. Sarah loves you. We're not trying to steal anything from you. We're trying to take care of you. And Patricia? Patricia is trying to steal from all of us. Dad was quiet for a long time, staring at the papers spread across the table. Legal documents, bank statements, medical bills, the timeline of complaints Patricia had filed against us. What do we do? He asked. We fight back, I said. The next morning I called Marcus and explained what we'd discovered about Patricia's campaign. He listened quietly, occasionally asking questions about dates and specifics. Sarah, he said when I finished, what you're describing sounds like a conspiracy to commit fraud. If you can prove that Patricia's son shared confidential banking information and that Patricia used that information to file false reports with the city, you might have grounds for both criminal charges and a civil lawsuit. What would we need to prove it? Documentation, phone records, email exchanges, bank records showing when Derek accessed Kelly's information versus when Patricia filed her complaints. It won't be easy to get, but it's possible. What about the immediate problem? The salon permits? Here's the thing. If Patricia filed false reports about code violations, and if we can prove those reports were made in bad faith, the city might be willing to work with you on a modified timeline for compliance. Meaning, instead of having 3 weeks to get compliant or shut down, you might be able to negotiate a longer timeline that makes the financial burden more manageable. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was hope. More hope than we'd had since I'd arrived. I spent the rest of the day making phone calls and gathering documentation. Bank records, city complaint files, property records going back 5 years. Each piece of paper told part of the story of how a family in crisis had been systematically targeted by someone who should have been a neighbor and ally. But as I dug deeper into Patricia's history, I found something that changed everything I thought I knew about her motivations. 3 years ago, Patricia's husband had died after a long battle with Alzheimer's disease. According to the obituary I found online, he'd spent his final months in a memory care facility that cost over $8,000 a month. Patricia Vance knew exactly what it was like to watch someone you love disappear piece by piece while the bills piled up and the savings disappeared. She knew what it was like to face impossible choices between quality of care and financial survival. She wasn't just a predator targeting a vulnerable family. She was someone who'd been through the same nightmare we were living, and instead of showing compassion, she decided to profit from our pain. That discovery changed how I felt about everything. Patricia wasn't evil. She was traumatized and desperate, and making choices that hurt other people because she was trying to protect herself from ever being vulnerable again. But understanding her motivations didn't excuse her actions. If anything, it made them worse. She knew exactly how much damage she was causing because she'd lived through that damage herself. "Kelly," I said that night, as we sat in the salon working on permit applications, "I found out something about Patricia." "What?" I told her about Patricia's husband, about the Alzheimer's, about the memory care facility. "Jesus," Kelly said. "So she knows exactly what we're going through. She knows, and she's using that knowledge to hurt us. Why would someone do that? I think she's trying to make sure she never has to go through it again. If she can buy our house cheap and flip it for a profit, she'll have enough money to protect herself if she ever needs expensive care. So, she's destroying our family to save her own future. That's what it looks like." Kelly was quiet for a long time, organizing bottles of nail polish that were already perfectly organized. "You know what the worst part is?" she said finally. "What?" "I understand it. If I were in her position, if I'd already lost everything once, I might be tempted to do the same thing. But you wouldn't? How do you know?" "Because you've been taking care of Dad for 16 years. Because you turned my bedroom into a nail salon instead of abandoning him when things got hard. Because you're here. I'm here because I don't have anywhere else to go." "No, you're here because you choose to be here. There's a difference." Kelly looked at me across the table covered with permit applications and business licenses, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Not gratitude exactly, but recognition, like she was seeing herself clearly for the first time in years. "Sarah, can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Do you think your mother would have approved of me if she'd known how things were going to turn out?" It was a question I'd never expected from Kelly, and I wasn't sure how to answer it. Mom had been gone for 19 years. I'd been 12 when she died, and my memories of her were filtered through a child's perspective and polished by years of grief. "I think Mom would have wanted Dad to be happy," I said finally. and I think she would have wanted him to be taken care of when he needed it. That's not what I asked. I know, but it's the only answer I can give you. I don't know what Mom would have thought about you personally, but I know what she would have thought about someone who stayed and fought for the people they loved. And what's that? She would have respected it, even if she didn't like everything about how it happened. When I found the documents hidden in Patricia's mailbox the next morning, I realized our fight was about to get much more complicated. Have you ever found evidence that completely changed your understanding of a situation? I hadn't meant to look in Patricia's mailbox. I'd been walking past her house on my way to the corner store when I noticed something white sticking out from the back of the metal box. The mailman had obviously tried to cram too much mail inside, and whatever was sticking out was getting wet from the morning dew. Any decent neighbor would have pushed it back in to protect it from the weather. But I wasn't feeling particularly neighborly toward Patricia Vance. Still, I found myself walking up her driveway. Not to be helpful, but because I was curious about what kind of mail she was getting. Maybe there would be something that confirmed our suspicions about her scheme. What I found was better and worse than anything I could have imagined. The papers sticking out of the mailbox were bank statements, but not from First National, where her son Derek worked. These were from Midwest Community Bank, and they showed account activity that made my blood run cold. Patricia Vance had been receiving monthly payments of $3,000 for the past 18 months. The source was listed as Sunset Properties, LLC. I'd never heard of Sunset Properties, but $3,000 a month was exactly what Kelly's salon brought in on a good month. It was also suspiciously close to what a family might pay for mortgage and utilities on a house like ours. I stood there on Patricia's driveway, holding bank statements that didn't belong to me, and realized I was probably committing a federal crime by reading someone else's mail. But I also realized I might be holding evidence of a much bigger conspiracy than we'd imagined. I took photos of the statements with my phone, shoved them back into the mailbox, and practically ran home. "Kelly," I called as I burst through the front door. "You need to see this." She was in the kitchen making breakfast for Dad, who was having one of his clearer mornings and was reading the newspaper like he used to before his memory started failing. "See what?" Kelly asked. I showed her the photos on my phone. Patricia's been getting payments from something called Sunset Properties, LLC, $3,000 a month for 18 months. Kelly set down the plate of scrambled eggs she'd been fixing and stared at my phone screen. "I've never heard of Sunset Properties," she said. "Neither have I, but I think we need to find out who they are." Dad looked up from his newspaper. "Sunset Properties bought the Murphy house last year." Kelly and I both turned to stare at him. "Dad, how do you know that?" "Because Jim Murphy told me before he moved to Florida. Said some investment company had made him an offer he couldn't refuse." "An investment company?" "They've been buying up houses all over the neighborhood. The Hendersons sold to them 6 months ago. The Johnsons 3 months ago." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Dad, where are all these families moving to?" "Retirement communities mostly. Places where they don't have to worry about maintenance and property taxes." Kelly and I exchanged glances. Patricia wasn't just targeting our family. She was part of something much bigger. "I need to make some phone calls," I said. I spent the next 2 hours on the phone with Marcus, explaining what I'd found and asking him to research Sunset Properties, LLC. Then I called the city planning office and asked about recent property sales in our neighborhood. What I learned made me sick to my stomach. In the past 2 years, 8 houses on our street had been sold to Sunset Properties, LLC. All of them had been family homes owned by elderly couples or widows. All of them had sold for significantly below market value. And all of the sellers had been dealing with major expenses right before they sold. Medical bills, home repairs, family emergencies that required quick cash. Marcus called me back an hour later with information that confirmed my worst fears. Sarah, Sunset Properties is owned by a holding company called Midwest Development Group, and the president of Midwest Development Group is Derek Vance, Patricia's son, the bank employee who'd had access to Kelly's financial information. So, this is a family business, I said. It looks like it. Derek identifies families in financial distress through his access to bank records. Patricia creates additional pressure through false complaints and community harassment. And then Sunset Properties swoops in with a below-market offer that looks like salvation to people who are drowning. And then what? What do they do with the houses? Based on the property records I found, they flip them, renovate them and sell them for double what they paid, or convert them to rental properties. How is this legal? Some of it isn't. Using confidential bank information to target customers is definitely illegal. Filing false reports with city agencies could be considered fraud, but the property purchases themselves are legal as long as the sellers consent. Even if that consent is obtained through manipulation and coercion, that's harder to prove. You'd need to show a pattern of deliberate deception, and you'd need victims willing to testify. Victims willing to testify. I thought about Jim Murphy, and the Hendersons, and the Johnsons, all of whom had sold their homes and moved away. How many of them realized they'd been manipulated? How many of them would be willing to come forward and admit they'd been taken advantage of? Marcus, what are our options? You could report Derek to the bank's compliance department and to state banking regulators. You could file a complaint with the city about Patricia's false reports. You could try to build a civil case for fraud and conspiracy. What about criminal charges? That would be up to the district attorney's office. But you'd need solid evidence of intentional wrongdoing, not just suspicious coincidences. After I hung up with Marcus, I sat in Dad's living room and tried to figure out our next move. We were dealing with people who had resources, connections, and years of experience manipulating vulnerable families. Patricia and Derek weren't just opportunists. They were professionals, but they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated Kelly and me. Kelly, I said, finding her in the salon organizing supplies. How would you feel about setting a trap? What kind of trap? The kind where we give Patricia exactly what she thinks she wants and then document everything she does to try to get it. Kelly sat down in one of the pedicure chairs and looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Sarah, she's trying to steal our house. I know, and I think we should let her think she's succeeding. Explain. Patricia thinks we're desperate and naive. She thinks the city inspection process is going to bankrupt us and force us to sell. So let's lean into that. Let's make her think her plan is working perfectly. How? By making her think we're about to lose everything. We stage some financial panic, maybe have a loud conversation about foreclosure where she can overhear it, make her think she needs to make her move soon before the bank takes the house. And then what? Then we record everything she does next. Every offer, every threat, every piece of inside information she shouldn't have. We build a case that's so solid, even her son's connections at the bank won't be able to protect them. Kelly was quiet for a long time, thinking it through. That's incredibly risky, she said finally. Everything we've done has been risky. At least this way, we're controlling the risk instead of just reacting to it. What if it backfires? What if we push too hard and she figures out what we're doing? Then we'll be in the same position we're in now, except we'll have tried to fight back instead of just accepting whatever happens to us. That afternoon, Kelly and I had a very loud, very dramatic conversation in our front yard about our financial situation. We made sure to mention specific numbers, specific deadlines in our growing panic about losing the house. We also made sure to have this conversation at exactly 3:30, which was when Patricia always came home from her volunteer work at the library. "I can't believe the bank is threatening foreclosure," Kelly said, her voice carrying clearly across the yard. "We've only missed 2 payments." "3 payments," I corrected, improvising. "And they said if we don't catch up by the end of the month, they're starting legal proceedings." "How much do we need?" $15,000, plus the cost of the salon permits, plus Dad's medical bills. I let my voice crack slightly on the last part. "I don't know how we're going to manage it all." "Maybe we should consider that offer from Patricia. I know you don't want to sell, but what choice do we have?" "I know. I just hate the idea of losing Mom's house." "It's not about what we want anymore, Sarah. It's about survival." I saw Patricia's curtains twitch in her front window, and I knew she was listening to every word. That evening, just as we'd expected, Patricia knocked on our door. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by," she said, wearing her most sympathetic expression. "But I couldn't help overhearing your conversation this afternoon, and I wanted to see if there was anything I could do to help." Kelly and I exchanged glances. The trap was working. "That's very kind of you," Kelly said, "but I don't think there's anything anyone can do at this point." "Well, I mentioned that my son and his wife are looking for a larger home. I've been thinking about it, and I wonder if we might be able to work something out that would benefit everyone." "What kind of something?" I asked. "I could talk to Derek about making a quick offer on your house. Something that would give you enough to pay off your debts and start fresh somewhere else." "But we don't want to start fresh somewhere else," Kelly said. "This is Frank's home. He's lived here for 30 years. "I understand that. But sometimes we have to make difficult choices for the people we love." Patricia's voice was perfectly reasonable, perfectly compassionate. If I didn't know what I knew about her, I might have believed she was genuinely trying to help. "How quick could Derek move on an offer?" I asked. "Very quick. He works in real estate finance, so he has connections with investors who can close fast when necessary. Investors who can close fast. Like Sunset Properties." "What kind of offer are we talking about?" Kelly asked. "Well, I'd have to have Derek look at the property, but based on comparable sales in the neighborhood, probably somewhere in the range of $220,000. $220,000 for a house that was worth at least $300,000, according to Kelly's estimate. "That seems low," I said. "It is below market value," Patricia agreed. "But when you need cash quickly, and when you're dealing with a property that has some complications, you have to be realistic about pricing." Complications? The unpermitted business, the code violations, the financial liens. Those all affect the value of the property. Financial liens. There were no financial liens on the house that Patricia should have known about unless someone with access to bank records had told her. Of course, if you can resolve all of those issues on your own, you might be able to get closer to market value, Patricia continued. But that takes time and money that you've already said you don't have. "How much time would Derek need to put together an offer?" Kelly asked. "I could have him stop by tomorrow evening to take a look at the property. If everything checks out, he could have an offer ready by the weekend." "That fast?" "When you work with the right people, things can move very quickly." After Patricia left, Kelly and I sat in the kitchen with our phones recording and our laptops open, documenting everything she'd said. "She's moving fast," Kelly said, "because she thinks we're desperate, and because she knows that if we have time to think about it, we might realize how badly she's trying to screw us." $220,000, Sarah, for a house worth $300,000. $80,000 of profit, plus whatever Derek makes when Sunset Properties flips it for $400,000. We could report this to the police right now. And say what? That our neighbor made us a low offer on our house? That's not illegal. But Using inside bank information is. We'd have to prove that. And right now, all we have is suspicion and circumstantial evidence. So we keep going. We keep going. The next evening, Derek Vance showed up at our door looking exactly like what he was, a mid-level bank employee who'd found a way to make extra money by exploiting his access to confidential information. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 35, with the kind of bland handsomeness that suggested he'd been popular in high school and had never quite gotten over it. He wore an expensive suit that was slightly too flashy for someone with his legitimate income, and he carried himself with the confidence of someone who thought he was much smarter than everyone around him. "Miss Cooper, Miss Johnson," he said, shaking our hands like we were old friends. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me." "Thank you for coming," Kelly said. "Your mother said you might be interested in making an offer on our property." "I might be, but I'd need to take a look around first, get a sense of the condition of the house, the scope of any issues that might affect the value." "Of course." Derek spent 45 minutes walking through our house, taking notes and photos, asking detailed questions about the electrical system, the plumbing, the roof, the foundation. Questions that went far beyond what a normal buyer would ask during an initial visit. He also asked questions about our financial situation that were way too personal and way too specific. "My mother mentioned you've been having some difficulty with the mortgage payments," he said, as we stood in the living room where Dad was watching television. "Some difficulty," Kelly agreed. "If you don't mind me asking, how far behind are you?" 3 months, I said, sticking to our fake story. "And what's the balance on the mortgage?" "About $160,000, Kelly said. Derek made notes on his clipboard, calculating numbers that he shouldn't have needed to calculate if this was a legitimate property evaluation. "What about other debts? Credit cards, medical bills, that sort of thing?" "Why do you need to know that?" I asked. "Because if I'm going to make a cash offer, I want to make sure the numbers work for everyone involved. There's no point in offering $200,000 if you need $250 to get clear of your debts." "How much would you be able to offer?" Kelly asked. "Based on what I've seen today, and factoring in the code violations and the unpermitted business, I'd probably be looking at somewhere around $210,000. $210,000, $10,000 less than his mother had suggested the night before. "That's quite a bit below market value," I said. "It is, but it's also a guaranteed cash sale that can close in 2 weeks. No financing contingencies, no inspection periods, no risk of the deal falling through. 2 weeks? I work with investors who specialize in quick closures. They understand that sometimes people need to sell fast, and they're willing to pay for that convenience. Investors who specialize in quick closures." He was talking about Sunset Properties without actually saying the name. "Can we have some time to think about it?" Kelly asked. "Of course. But I should mention that these investors are looking at several properties right now. If you're interested, I'd need to know by Monday to keep you in the running." Creating false urgency. Another classic manipulation tactic. After Derek left, Kelly and I sat in Dad's kitchen and compared notes about everything he'd said and done. "He knew too much," Kelly said. "Way too much. He knew details about our financial situation that we've never told anyone except Marcus. And he lowballed the offer by $10,000 from what Patricia suggested yesterday, because he thinks we're getting more desperate by the day." Are we getting more desperate by the day? It was a good question. Our fake financial crisis was starting to feel uncomfortably real. The salon permits were still going to cost $20,000. Dad's medical bills were still piling up. The monthly mortgage payment was still due, whether we had Patricia problems or not. "Maybe," I said, "but not desperate enough to let them steal our house." That night, I called Marcus and gave him a detailed report of everything Derek had said and done during his visit. Sarah, what you're describing sounds like a textbook real estate scam. The artificially low offer, the false urgency, the inside knowledge of your financial situation. If you can prove that Derek got that information through his position at the bank, you've got grounds for both criminal and civil action. What do we need to prove it? Bank records showing when he accessed Kelly's account information, correlation between those access dates and his family's activities, documentation of the pattern of similar transactions involving other families. How do we get bank records? That's the tricky part. The bank isn't going to voluntarily provide information that shows their employee was misusing confidential data. You'd need a court order, and to get a court order, you'd need probable cause. Do we have probable cause? You might, but you'd need to file a formal complaint first, and that would tip off Derek that you're investigating him. What if we wait until after Monday? What happens Monday? Derek wants an answer about the house sale. If we say no, he might back off and look for easier targets. But if we say yes, you might be able to get him to reveal more about how the scam works. Exactly. Sarah, that's incredibly dangerous. If you agree to sell and then try to back out later, you could end up in legal trouble yourself. What if we don't back out? What do you mean? What if we actually sell them the house? There was a long pause on the other end of the phone. Sarah, you can't sell a house you don't legally own. But Kelly can. And if we sell it to Derek for $210,000 and then immediately buy it back for the same price before he can flip it to Sunset Properties, that would be fraud, would it? Or would it be exactly the same thing Derek and Patricia have been doing to other families, except in reverse? It would still be fraud, but it would also give us documented proof of Derek's entire operation. Bank transfers, property transfers, business relationships between Derek and Sunset Properties. Everything we'd need to prove they've been running a systematic scam. And it would also put you at risk for criminal charges. Maybe, but it would also put Derek and Patricia at risk for much more serious criminal charges. I could hear Marcus thinking on the other end of the line. There might be another way, he said finally. What? What if instead of actually selling the house, you agreed to sell it and then documented everything Derek did to prepare for the purchase? The bank searches, the communication with Sunset Properties, the coordination with his mother? How would we do that? By making the sale contingent on something that you know won't happen, like your father's approval or a clean title search, or something else that gives you an out. And in the meantime, Derek would be scrambling to put together the purchase, and every move he made would be evidence of how the scam works. It wasn't a perfect plan, but looking around Dad's kitchen, thinking about all the families in our neighborhood who'd been manipulated into selling their homes for far less than they were worth, I realized that perfect wasn't the goal. Justice was the goal. And sometimes justice required taking risks that safety would never allow. What Derek didn't know was that while he thought he was scamming us, we were about to expose a fraud that went much deeper than just our neighborhood. What would you do if you discovered your neighbors were running a systematic scam targeting elderly families? Please like this story, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. Your support means everything to me, and I can't wait to hear what you think about how this all ends.